Paul from NS Now, good morning.
Morning.
Paul, thanks very much for joining us. In the past, supporters groups have said, well, owners don't communicate enough with fans. Moshiri sent you an open letter last night and he spoke to us this morning. So you can't fault him for that, surely.
Jim, before I answer that question, I just have to say that is one of the most disturbing interviews from a club owner I've ever heard. I'm an Evertonian who's watched Everton for over 50 years, and I've seen good times and I've seen bad times. But the situation that we've got now is we've got an owner that sounds as if he's completely out of touch with reality. The reality is that this football club, in the 7 years that he has been here, has deteriorated year in, year out. Our competitive position has deteriorated. Why is that? Well, it's not because of a lack of resource, because he's, as he said, possibly the one accurate thing that he did say was that he's poured money into the club. We understand that, we know that, and we appreciate it. You've got to look at how it's been spent, and then you've got to look at how the club has been run. And not only do we now seem to have an owner that seems totally out of touch with reality, but we've got one of the weakest boards in the Premier League. And that's why this protest has built over a period of time. You don't need me to tell you that the Everton support is some of the most loyal and some of the most vociferous.
For sure, they're so passionate. I agree.
In the country,
I agree.
We sell Goodison out week in, week out, and there's hardly ever an away game where we don't take up a full allocation of tickets. And what we expect from Everton Football Club is what all Evertonians over all generations have expected. We want to see good football, but most of all, we want to see people who care about the club and represent the club in the way that we think the club should be represented. And what I just heard from Farhad Moshiri is so far from that, and what the board have done in recent years is so far from that, that I am truly disturbed as to the future of our football club.
Well, you saw in his open letter last night, Paul, in the final line of it, the focus of myself, the club and the fans is aligned. A better Everton, and I'm confident we can move forward in a constructive and positive manner. Now, he says it is your democratic right, of course, to protest, and it is, but it's a protest post-match constructive.
His actions don't match his words. That's the problem.
No, but I'm asking you, Paul, is a protest, when he's asking for the fans to be constructive and align yourselves with us, is a post-match protest constructive?
When we were 5 points behind Burnley with 5 games to go last season, and just before that, the fans took it upon themselves to start these coach greets. And I don't know if you were ever at Goodison when one of them happened, but you will rarely have seen anything like it in English football. So the idea that the fans aren't aligned with the interests of the club is wrong. Look what's happening on Saturday. On Saturday, there's going to be a fan greet before the game. So we're expecting several thousand fans to be outside Goodison Park to greet the coaches a couple of hours before the game. And then during the game, Everton will get the normal level of support that they get at every home game at Goodison Park. And, obviously if we play well and if we win, that support will be greater than it would be if the results were different. But after that, there's going to be a sit-in, and it's going to be a peaceful sit-in in the sense that there's not going to be any stupidity or anything else. But this sit-in is actually an act of support. And why do I say it's an act of support? It's because we've been driven to this. We've been driven to this by the actions of the owner and by the inability of this board to compete in the Premier League. Everton Football Club, are one of 5 ever-present clubs in the Premier League. How do we find ourselves in a position, as Simon talked about earlier, where we can't compete in the transfer market because of the bad decisions that we've made in the past?
Here is Simon, Paul. Here is Simon.
I was going to say, Paul, obviously I understand the concern you have. Obviously, talking about some of the worst things you've ever heard from an owner, then you need to plug your ears into what Roland de Châtelet was saying and people like Steve Dell, which are far more damaging things that were ever said about football clubs. Farhad Moshiri, his biggest mistake is a fool and his money were lucky enough to get together in the first place because he's not deploying it well. But what is it, when you make this observation, and tragically for me, I've spent a lot of time around football boards, and I would suggest to you, on the whole, most of them are there with levels of competence that would come to questionability or questioning their competence level. So when you say to me about this board that you've got, and I've got no skin in the game, I don't defend Bill Kenwright because I like him. I couldn't care less about Denise. I have a real warmth towards your football club, having sold players to you in the past and always enjoyed Everton as a football club. But I do find it perplexing when you put up this gold standard of boards inside the Premier League and say, well, they can't compete with any of them. Who are you talking about? It wasn't so long ago that Arsenal's board was a disgrace. Everyone and the Arsenal fans were up in arms about them. Man City, well, that's a different dynamic. Newcastle wasn't so long ago a disgrace. Man United's been all over the place for the last 10 years, and I can go down the Premier League and I can levy criticism at every single board. The Tottenham fans dislike Daniel Levy intensely, and on we go.
Okay, let me read out a charge sheet against the Everton board.
Okay.
Gross incompetence. And why do I say that? A failure to control Farhad Moshiri's poor decisions. So he's made...
But sorry, Paul, I just want to stop you there for 1 second. You can't control an owner, Paul. You can't control the money. The money controls the board. That's how it really works. Not in the ideal world where you might live. The money controls things.
Simon, I've heard you say this before, so let me say what I want to say, and then you can come back to
me. Mate.
So, gross incompetence, and why do I say that? A failure to control Farhad Moshiri's poor decisions, a failure of governance. You know, we have an executive-only board. We have no independent directors. We have nobody who can provide oversight or provide external views to the board. We have a failure of financial controls. You know, you're a money man. You understand the damage that's been done to Everton in terms of the losses over recent years. And I know there's mitigating factors in terms of COVID and stuff, but all football clubs have those mitigating factors. Yeah. A total inability to build commercial revenues outside of a friendly sponsor in USN. And ultimately, and I think this is the problem with the board in terms of the culture of the club, we've built a totally uncompetitive culture within the football club. You know, if you look at, for example, Manchester City, and yes, you can argue about, you know, the amount of resources and everything that they have. But if you look at the manager that they have and the expectations and the standards that he sets, that is, for example, in terms of corporate culture, in terms of competitive culture, that is the gold standard, to use your word.
Some would say, Paul...
And we have none of that at
Some would say
Club.
that there was an attempt at that with the introduction of Carlo Ancelotti as a blue-chip manager. I always felt it was the wrong fit. I thought he did you a favour to come down for an enormous salary and wasn't committed to the calls, and off he went at the first opportunity. But some would say that he tried that mantra of bringing in what people would perceive. Now, also, you can look at Man City, and Man City fans will just dislike me intensely for saying it, but they've been caught up in all kinds of financial fair play situations themselves over the last 10 years and sanctioned on the back of it. So Everton aren't alone, and there's a whole raft of football clubs, including Liverpool, that have been caught within the confines of having sanctions about the way that they are being challenged about their financial running of the football club. Your biggest problem is that he's picked the wrong managers. Benitez, I can't fathom. No. It'll just alienate you. That's the one. But your biggest problem is that you've got an owner, and I disagree with you. I understand what your point of view is. If you've got a strong board, then ultimately you get more control over what the owner will do. But I can assure you, and I can reassure you, that the idea that the money, chief executives in football clubs that have owners that have the ability to be able to finance a football club the way Moshiri's chosen to do, are simply people that have authority to a certain level, and then they're divested of that authority by the money in the room. So I don't care who you put in that boardroom. You could have put Kenyon in there, you could put anyone in there. Moshiri and that kind of personality will still do what they want. So your issue is not with Denise, is not with Bill Kenwright and a boardroom of directors that you think you need independent representation in there, is in your owner. And what are you going to do now then? Because is there a big queue of people that are going to sit there, listen to you, watching you guys sit in and say, I tell you what, we're going to buy Everton now? Because that's your question. Let's
get into that topic then, because the club is up for sale. Okay, there are bankers in the US who are actively looking for buyers of Everton football.
And he wants out as well, Paul. By the way.
Yeah, I don't think that's in dispute, is it? So, what's the barrier to entry for an investor or for a buyer of Everton Football Club? One of the big barriers to entry is the price that Farhad Moshiri wants for his equity. So we're in a situation where
What's he want?
Around 450 to 500 million pounds.
And what's his equity position?
How much has he put into the club?
No, what's his equity? How much of the club does he own?
94%.
So the club's worth 500 million quid.
In his eyes, yes.
So West Ham have just been bought, or West Ham have been valued at 800 million quid.
Yeah.
So how are Everton not worth 500 million quid?
They don't have debt. They don't have a future capex requirement, which is probably approaching more than £500 million, for example.
Well, that's for a stadium, though, isn't it?
I know, but the cash still needs to be found. So let me just finish my point, okay? So Moshiri expects a new investor to pay him, let's call it £450 million.
Yeah.
He then expects, one would expect that the external debt would be called in because, it's not a high street bank. It's a backstreet lender in rights and media funding. That's £150 million.
Well, that can still be carried, can't it? They'll be quite happy to carry it because they'll be still getting interest.
That's an assumption, I think.
It's an assumption that financiers like to have money out and earn money on it.
To be honest, Paul, let's stick to football because you're a football fan. Are you excited about the new stadium? Were you excited when he appointed Ancelotti and before him Koeman? Do you back Lampard?
I think Frank is obviously a good young manager, but he's inexperienced. And given the circumstance, of course I back him because he's
Are you excited about the new stadium?
Not particularly at this moment in time because we've got bigger concerns, and those concerns are staying in the Premier League. Because what happens at the end of this season if we drop into the Championship? We'll lose more than £90 million worth of revenue in a business that's already, currently losing hundreds of millions, if possibly slightly less now, maybe.
Your dearest hope, obviously, is that you stay in the Premier League. Are you going to continue to give the players on the field your all-out support? That's what Moshiri's asking you to do.
Well, the fan, he doesn't have to ask that, and that's another example. That's another example of him being out of touch because he doesn't have to ask that. That's an absolute given.
But don't you think, Paul, and again, I'm not defending an owner, so please don't put me in a camp where I'm defending an owner because I've been very critical of Moshiri for a number of years now. Don't you think, like one of your colleagues said earlier on, that some of the frustration that you guys should be living, and you won't do it because ultimately you want to see the team being successful, is that the performance, you've got a good enough group of players to not be third from bottom in the league. You've got a good enough manager. I don't think he's going to be the ultimate solution for you to not being operating in the position that you're in. Isn't a lot of this about also the immediacy of the diabolical performances of the players on the pitch and the management, rather than just the owner? Well,
it's all of these things, and that's why I said I was so concerned at the beginning of our chat here. I think the way the club performs on the pitch, the way the players perform, and even the way that the coaching squads and the manager perform from time to time, partly is due to the culture that exists within the club. And that's why I say that the culture within the club is not competitive. And you know, Simon, in any business, that the culture of a business starts from the very top. And if you don't have the right people, if you don't have the people that are competitive versus your peers and your competition, then you're never going to succeed. So why have Everton consistently underperformed in recent years? It's because of the corporate culture. Who is responsible for the corporate culture? The board and the owner. And what we've heard today from the owner is somebody that's completely out of touch with reality. And what we hear on a daily, weekly, monthly basis from the board is not that far behind neither.
Okay. Paul from NS Now, Everton Fan Group, thank you so much for joining us. 11:20.